Alright guys, here we go with part 2 of this Vegas trip that I'm on. And today, I'm going to play a poker tournament for some reason. Now, as you guys probably know, in cash games, I kind of know what's going on. When it comes to tournaments, I 100% have no idea what I'm doing. With that being said, I'm going to head over to Bally's and try not to lose immediately. And who knows? Maybe we'll have some fun. Right, so the event I'm actually playing is number 34, which is a $1,500 no limit hold'em freeze out. I think freeze out means once you get eliminated, you can't re-enter. Not 100% sure. I'll have to ask Ethan. He's the one who knows all the tournament poker terms. So the silver lining to today is if I lose quickly, we'll get to play cash. I think that's what that means, right? Anyway, before we head down there and enter the tournament, I wanted to give you guys another quick reminder that on June 30th, I'm having a meetup game, but it's going to be virtual. 1-2 no limit on Club GG. I'm going to be playing like 3 or 4 different tables, so if that sounds fun to you, feel free to join by hitting the link in the description box. Also, the following day, there's going to be a $2,000 free roll tournament for anyone who plays in that meetup game. So if you've been wanting a chance to play alongside me, but you live really far away or whatever, here's a chance to do it digitally. Anyway, let's go to the World Series of Poker. Alright guys, here we are playing a $1,500 freeze out event at the World Series of Poker. We're going to start things off in level 1 where the blinds are 100, 100 with a $100, well I guess just 100 chip big blind ante. We start off with 25,000 in our stack, and in the first hand I get 10-8 suited, raise it up to 300 and get called by the button and big blind. We go 3 ways to a flop of 5-5-4 with 2 hearts. Big blind checks. I decide to check, although I don't think betting would be terrible, and the button checks behind. So 3 of us still going to a turn, which is a good one. It's the 10 of hearts, improving us to top pair, but also bringing in a possible flush. Big blind checks, and I decide to check again, not really sure how much value there is in betting, but the button disagrees and bets 500. The big blind folds, of course, I make the call. We're off to a river, which is not great. The 9 of hearts, bringing 4 hearts on the board. I check it again. This time he bets 800, and considering that now my hand is pretty weak, I don't really think calling is the best play. Maybe once in a while putting in a check raise might work, but I decide to just let it go, considering that now we're also losing to some of those bluffs he might have had on the turn, and that's assuming we were even ahead in the first place. I get out of the way, and we move on to the second hand, also in level 1. This time there's an early position open to 200, the small blind calls, and I defend the big blind with Jack-7 of hearts. 3 of us going to a flop, which comes pretty good for my hand. It's King Jack-7. Checks around, and we see a 6 of spades on the turn. This time the small blind leads out for 500. Raising seems fine, but considering that the initial raiser is still left to act on a board like this, I think it makes more sense to just call, so that's what I do. And he gets out of the way, so heads up in position to the 9 of spades on the river. This time the small blind checks it over to me, which makes sense, you know, the flush and some possible straights got there, but I still think we can go for some value, so I bet 700, and after some thought, he tosses in a call. I turn it over, and we're good. Moving right along, in this hand I open from early position to 300 with ace-9 of clubs. The button calls, and then the big blind bumps it up to 1,500. We're playing around 25 or 26,000 deep, so in position, I think it's okay to call, and the button seems to agree because he also makes the call. So 3 of us going to a flop of 10-9-7 with 1 club. Interestingly enough, the button continues with a bet of 1,300. I thought this was strange because this board looks like it's got me and the button written all over it, but what do I know? I make the call with middle pair and backdoor flush draw, and the button gets out of the way. So now we're heads up, going to the 6 of diamonds on the turn. This time the big blind decides he's not going to bet again, finally checks it, and now I decide to bet small, 2,600. Not necessarily for value, just because this board is so advantageous for me. I think betting almost all my hands for a small size is an okay play. Anyway, so I put 2,600 in the middle, and he makes the call. So quite a big pot brewing now, as we're off to the 4 of hearts on the river. Big blind checks, and now it's on me. Well, considering that he re-raised before the flop, bet the flop, and then called a bet on the turn, I think he's most likely got an overpair, maybe a hand like ace-10, and I just don't get the feeling that a 9 is good enough to check back here. So I decide to apply max pressure. I've got 19,000 in my stack, which is around pot and a half, and I choose to move it all in there and try to win this pot. If he has what I think he has, a hand like kings or queens, maybe even like a set of 10s, it would be really brutal to call here, considering that I could really easily have an 8, and he should almost never have one. At least that's what I was thinking. What do I know about tournaments? But it seems to work out because after about a minute, he reluctantly puts his cards in the muck. So this one works out and we take down another pot. The very next shuffle, there's an early position open to 500 and I defend the big blind with ace-10. We go to a flop of queen jack 9 with 2 clubs. I've got the ace of clubs and I've got a 10. So when I check and he bets 500, I think we've got a good candidate to check raise and start bluffing right away. We can represent a straight considering that we've got a 10, and we can also represent any flush if a club arrives. So that's what I'm thinking as I make it 1,500 and he calls. The turn is one of those good cards that I think allows me to continue betting. It's the 5 of clubs. Like I said, I've got the ace of clubs, and I would sometimes check raise the flop with the nut flush draw. So I continue betting, this time 3,000. But my opponent calls right away. I don't even know if he's looking at the board at this point. He just seems to love his hand. So when the river comes to 5 of diamonds, I think it's time to just give it up. So this time I just check, and now he bets 5,000, which I think just confirms the fact that we were up against a pretty strong hand. I let it go, and he later told me he had king 10 for a flopped straight. Nice hand, man. In level 2, nothing really happened aside from me posting my blinds and having to fold. So we move on to level 3 where the blinds are 200, 300 with a 300 big blind ante. I'm around starting stack again after bleeding for a while before there's a middle position open to 800 and I defend the big blind with queen 10 of diamonds. Flop comes king, queen 7, 1 diamond and 2 clubs. I check it, she bets 1,200 and with middle pair, can't go anywhere just yet. So I call, and we see the 5 of hearts on the turn. I check it. This time she bets 2,200. Already getting a little bit dicey, but I think she could still be bluffing with hands like ace-jack or perhaps some flush draws. I don't know. I don't want to give her credit for top pair right away. So I toss in the call, and we see a 10 of hearts on the river, which I know what you're thinking. It's kind of cool because we make 2 pair, but I think it improves a lot of hands that she might have been bluffing with. I would have much rather seen a complete brick on the river. At any rate, I check it over to her once again, and after some thought, she checks it back. Seems like a good sign, and sure enough, after I show it, she mucks. Moving right along to level 4 now, 200, 400, 400. Once again, I've got around a starting stack, and in this one, I open in late position with queen jack of spades to 900. The button calls, the big blind calls, and the 3 of us go to a flop of king, queen 4 with 2 clubs. Big blind checks, and I think you can go either way here between checking or betting. I decide to bet small. You know, being that we're 3 ways, I actually think a check might be a little better, but anyway, I toss in 1,000. Now the button on my left min raises to 2,000. Okay, so the big blind calls the 2,000, which is a little bit odd, maybe a little alarming if I'm honest, but what am I going to do for 1,000 more into a pot that's now some ridiculous amount, right? So I toss in the call and get instantly rewarded when we see the queen of diamonds on the turn. it does introduce a second flush draw. This time the big blind checks, and I'm going to be honest, this isn't necessarily a recommended play against strong players, but against these two particular guys who I don't think are taking this game super seriously, I decide to lead out because I've got 3 of the same card. Yep, absolute caveman-like mentality. I have good hands, so I bet. So I throw out 3,700. By the way, I'm thinking that the min raise on the flop is probably to buy a free river card with a flush draw or something like that. You guys know what I'm talking about. So I don't want to allow that. I toss in the 3,700. The button makes the call, and the big blind calls once again. So I think this is a pretty good situation. It seems to me like the player on my left on the button has some sort of draw, and the big blind could very well have a hand like King Jack or maybe even Ace King. I don't know these tournament players. But either way, we go 3-way still to a river card with a pretty big pot already, over 20,000. And what do you know? Things go from good to even better. It's the Jack of Hearts improving me to a full house. Big blind checks again. Now I bet 7,000, strictly targeting a hand like a Jack from the button or still a King from the big blind. Don't really think either of these guys are super strong. So like I said, I bet 7,000 and the button immediately gets out of the way. But the big blind disagrees and now check raises all in for barely more than a min raise. Not exactly a very fun spot, but considering that we're still beating trip queens that aren't a full house or a hand like pocket fours, and we're getting such a good price, I'm obviously not going to fold a full house. So I toss in the money, and what do you know? We're up against King Queen of Hearts for a better full house. Wow. Yeah, an absolute cooler, I think. And just like that, we are out of the tournament in a pretty brutal fashion. Okay, so I just busted this tournament behind me, and I gotta say it feels pretty liberating. It's not even 2 p.m. yet, and I'm already free. Can't be that mad about it. Anyway, I think this vlog is a little too short. There was only like 4 or 5 hands in that tournament for me, so let's head somewhere on the strip and play some cash. Let's go. All right, so back to playing cash. Here we are at Resorts World, 5, 10, 20. This hand I opened 8-6 of spades from early position to 60, and only the small blind makes the call. Off to a flop, which comes definitely above average. It's Ace Queen 8 with 2 spades, giving me a pair, a flush draw, and a board that should be good for me, right? So when she checks, I bet $140, and she makes the call. The turn is amazing. It's an offsuit 8, right, giving me very disguised trips. And she could still very easily have top pair or a flush draw herself. So this time when she checks, I bet $560. But unfortunately, she folds right away, claiming that she just had a straight draw on the flop. Still, not a bad start. In the next one, the button opens to 60, and I call in the big blind with 10-8 of diamonds. Could re-raise this hand sometimes, but this time I just call, and we go to a flop of 9-8-5 with 1 diamond. I check, she bets $90, and I make the call. The turn is pretty good. It's the king of diamonds. Gives me a flush draw, but I guess maybe it's not so good because she could easily have hands that contain a king that were bluffing on the flop and now improve to top pair. So when I check and she bets $240, don't see any other play but calling here. So that's what I do. And we see another king on the river, which I think is good, right? It makes it less likely she's got one of those. Check it a third time. Now she fires out $600. Whew. Okay, so a pretty close spot. I've played with her a fair amount of times before when I come to Vegas, and she's been a very tight player, at least in my memory, so that makes me want to fold. But on the other hand, there are 2 clubs out there and some missed straight draws, I guess. That obviously makes me want to call. At this point, having 2 diamonds is pretty terrible because we would want her to be bluffing with missed diamonds, and having a 10 also isn't great. I guess she could also have hands like 7-6 because, you know, she raised on the button. Doesn't really mean she has to have a very strong holding. So I don't know. After some thought, I decide to stay disciplined and let my third pair go and get instantly punished as she tosses me her cards across the table so that I can see she had Queen Jack offsuit. The pain. Nice hand, miss. In the next one, that same player opens to 50 from middle position, and I make it $200 out of the small blind with 8-7 of hearts. She makes the call, so we go heads up to a flop of King 9-6 with 1 heart. Pretty good board for me. I could easily have a lot of strong hands, and I actually do have an open-ended straight draw. Plus, there's also a heart out there for, you know, a little added gusto. I bet $100, and she makes the call. The turn is the deuce of diamonds, shouldn't really change much. Now I think it makes sense to size up both with good hands and bluffs, so I toss in $900 now, and she quickly gets out of the way, so this one's coming to us. Now we get moved over from the must move to the main game and get involved right away where there's an early position open to $60, small blind calls, and I defend the straddle with Jack 9 offsuit. A little questionable, but here we go. 3 ways to a flop of Queen 8 deuce rainbow. Small blind checks, I check it, and the early position raiser continues with a bet of $80. Small blind calls, and now it's back on me. So yeah, I don't really have anything aside from a straight draw, right, if a 10 comes. But here's what I'm thinking. It seems to me like the early position raiser just randomly bet $80 with any hand, and then the small blind called with top pair. I think this gives me a good opportunity to apply some pressure and represent hands like Queen 8 suited, Queen deuce suited, pocket 8s, pocket 2s. I could easily have those hands, and I just don't get the feeling that anyone is super strong right now. So I check raise to $310. Early position raiser calls, so I guess I was wrong about him, but the small blind does fold. So we're going heads up to a turn, which is the 9 of clubs, improving me to a pair, I guess. At this point, though, I think it's pretty obvious that he's got something better than a 9, so I decide to continue bluffing, this time $900. And now he thinks it over for a long time before folding. So I think this one worked out nicely. I'm pretty sure we did not have the best hand, but I'll take it. In the next one, there's a late position open to 50. Button makes the call, and I choose to raise out of the small blind with 10-9 suited, making it $300 to go. Calling is probably also fine, but I think a raise works a little bit better, so that's what I do. Late position calls, but the button gets out of the way. So heads up to a flop of 8-7 deuce with 1 heart. So once again, we have an open-ended straight draw and a backdoor flush draw. I decide to continue with a $200 bet, and she makes the call. By the way, this is the same opponent who showed me a bluff earlier. So we're going to see what happens here as we go to the 8 of hearts on the turn, improving me to a flush draw. And I think it's pretty unlikely that she would have an 8. Sure, sometimes it's possible, but I think what's going to be more common is she has some sort of pocket pair, maybe bigger than the 8, or maybe a hand like 6s or pocket 5s. So I decided to continue betting for a small size, $330, hoping to put those hands in a tough spot. And after some thought, she announces she has pocket 4s and lets it go. So she showed me a bluff. Now it's my turn to toss my cards across the table and let her know that we got one too. By the way, this was totally friendly. I would never recommend doing this in a malicious way, but we were just messing around. Anyway, that brings us to the very last hand of the night, which is also the very next shuffle. There's an early position open to 60, and I'm on the button with pocket 8s. Most of the time, I think just calling makes the most sense, but this time I decide to bump it up to $200, and only the initial raiser from early position makes the call. 2 of us going to a pretty good flop of 5 deuce deuce. Not bad when you've got a hand like pocket 8s, so when he checks, I continue with the small bet, and he calls. The turn is the 7 of spades. He checks, and now we have a question between checking back and perhaps allowing him to bluff on the river, or continuing to bet. With the hand as weak as pocket 8s, and by weak I mean there's going to be a lot of bad river cards, I think betting is better than checking. If I were to check some over pairs, I'd rather do it with bigger ones, so this time I do continue betting $210. And once again, he makes the call. Once he calls twice, doesn't seem very likely he's doing it with a hand like ace-king or ace-queen high, despite me betting pretty small. So when the river comes the deuce of spades, technically improving me to a full house, I don't really know if there's much value in betting a third time, so when he checks, I check it back, and sadly we end up losing against pocket nines. Barely had us, but second place, doesn't matter how close you are, is no good. So we're going to lose this one, and that brings an end to this session. At this point it was getting pretty late, so it was time to rack up and get out of there. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed the hands. So, I just finished playing some 5-10 back here, and I gotta admit, it was not the most exciting session for myself, especially compared to some of the recent vlogs on this channel, but I am happy to report that I did end up winning $1,700 over the course of like 4 or 5 hours. Considering how this morning went with the tournament and everything, I'll take it, because that means I ended up winning like $200 or $300 on the day. And not a bad result, like I said, when you think about how the morning went. However, I gotta be honest, about half of the day's profit went to this really cool new hoodie I got. You know, they say don't buy overly expensive things, and this definitely qualifies, but come on. But anyway, as always, thank you guys for watching, and I don't know if there's gonna be another tournament vlog for this World Series. I think maybe one more on Sunday. I just gotta be real with you guys, I don't really enjoy them, so yeah, there's that. I much prefer cash, but you already knew that, and hopefully the videos are entertaining either way. Like I said, thank you guys for watching, thanks for all the support, and until next time, good luck at the tables. Peace.